Hi everyone, welcome back. So I've been an audiophile for going on 40 years now. And in all those 40 years, there have only been a couple of lulls where I haven't owned any stereo equipment at all. Generally speaking, I've always owned at least one or two systems. Now, I was always looking to upgrade, so I'd always buy equipment, use it for a period of time, and then sell it and buy something more expensive and rinse and repeat. And I did this over and over again. But over time, I came to realize that the path to better sound quality was definitely not a linear upward slope, and throwing money at expensive gear isn't necessarily the answer. Over the years, I made a few upgrades to my systems that ended up actually detracting from the overall sound quality of the music, despite the fact that I had spent more money on the new equipment than I had on the old equipment that was being replaced. I mean, generally speaking, more expensive is better, right? Right? Well, not always. Furthermore, aside from throwing lots of money at expensive gear, I hadn't realized that there were some cost-free steps to better sound quality as well. So, having several decades of audio experience under my belt, I thought I'd make a video to share some of that experience with you guys. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm some sort of rocket surgeon or audio guru, but over the years, you do learn a thing or two when you're constantly playing around with gear. So here we go. Number one, the very first tip that I want to give you guys is that when you're buying speakers, buy speakers to fit the room size. You don't want to get speakers that are too small for the room or they won't adequately fill the space. Conversely, you don't want to get speakers that are too large for the room or they'll overwhelm your space and be completely unenjoyable. In both cases, you're not going to get optimal, enjoyable sound. The right size speaker should be able to adequately permeate the entire listening room with sound without it becoming overbearing or overwhelming. And even though they look pretty impressive, too big of a speaker for a given room will cause all kinds of sonic problems. And now, speaking of rooms, the second tip I want to mention is that the room is the biggest factor in terms of sound quality. You can't expect a system that sounds awesome in one room to necessarily sound as good in another room. It depends on a bunch of variables, including room shape, ceiling height, items in the room, floor finishing. All of these are factors in terms of achieving good sound quality. To put that into perspective, I had a system worth $10,000 once upon a time that sounded awesome in one of my apartments, and when I moved into my new condo, the sound never came together like it had at the previous residence. No matter what I did, that particular setup did not work at the new place. I ended up having to change the speakers to suit the room before I got anywhere at all with the sound. And again, with respect to the room, if at all possible, I would always recommend starting with a brighter room that you have to tame down rather than a dead sounding room that you'll have to brighten up. It's relatively easy to, for example, throw down some area rugs or to add some plants to the room in order to tone down reflections. But it's not all that easy to brighten up an already overdamped room, which can completely suck the life right out of the music. Now, the third thing I'd like to mention is speaker positioning, and I cannot stress enough the importance of proper speaker positioning. I can't tell you how many times I've seen really great systems not living up to their full potential because of bad speaker positioning, whether they're too close to the rear wall, too close to a room corner, or tucked into a cubby or a bookcase, or even positioned completely asymmetrically. In situations like these, one may as well just instead buy a cheap system or a soundbar for that matter and be done with it. Now, generally speaking, you want your speakers positioned symmetrically in a more or less equilateral triangle with respect to the listening position, give or take. In my experience, most speakers sound better away from the back and side walls. Now, there of course are some exceptions to that very loose rule though, like audio note speakers, for example, are actually designed to be put into a room's corners. And furthermore, many sealed box designs can be placed close to the wall without suffering too much detriment. But more often than not, I would recommend pulling your speakers away from room boundaries in order to get the most of them. And besides pulling them away from room boundaries, you will also want to play around with their toe-in as well. Now, some speakers do sound their best when pointing straight ahead into the room, but most others actually do require some toe in to some degree or other. I've most often had luck with a slight amount of toe in with most speakers where the sonic meeting point is behind me. In other words, the speakers don't point directly at my ears, but rather just to the outside of my ears to varying degrees depending on the speaker. Again, though, I have had some speakers that sounded their best in my current room while pointed straight ahead. One such speaker that immediately comes to mind is the Epos M12.2 that I owned. They're excellent, robust speakers, but the treble can have just a touch too much zing when pointed directly at the ears. With those speakers pointed straight ahead, sitting in the sweet spot amounted to a bit of off-axis listening, which took the edge off to just the right degree, with the added benefit of the sound filling up more of my large listening room due to creating an overall wider sound field. Now, the topic of speaker positioning brings me to my fourth point regarding the use of tone controls. Many times people will plunk down their speakers without much thought, then try to rely on bass and treble controls to quote unquote fix the sound. But I'm most definitely not a tone controls kind of guy, so I take speaker positioning very seriously. Furthermore, I've very clearly noted over the years that the use of analog tone controls muddies up the sound almost inevitably. When tone controls are engaged, it's just more circuitry for the signal to go through, and I've always noticed a degradation in the purity of the sound. The sense of depth to the music is almost always lost when tone controls are engaged, so I prefer to keep everything neutral or bypassed if at all possible. The fifth point I'll mention relates to amplifiers. Now, as far as amps are concerned, get an amp that partners well with your preferred speakers, not the other way around. In other words, focus on getting speakers that you like first, and then later get the proper amp to power them. And regarding an amp's power output, and I have to stress this, it is more often than not better to get a lower powered, high quality amp over a high powered, low quality amp. For example, I would rather have a Pass Labs A25 amplifier over a BPC 150 watt, Kmart or Walmart special. And if you don't know what BPC means, it stands for black plastic crap. For example, like some cheap Sony or some other department store brand that boasts ridiculously high power. While those numbers may look good on paper, those amplifiers won't have the current to properly drive more demanding speakers. Now, it's nice to have good amps and speakers that work well together, but we can't overlook what should be the most obvious thing, and that brings me to point number 6, the source. It's a very good idea to seek out the best source possible for your system, and I'm talking about the recordings themselves. An uncompressed digital file will sound miles better than the same music encoded as a 128-bit MP3. Low-quality digital files, or albums and tapes in poor condition, for that matter, will completely choke a well-thought-out system's ability to optimally perform. No matter how good a system is, it cannot make a pig's ear into a silk purse. So get the best recordings you can and let your system shine. Now on to point number 7. Match components that complement each other. That's what's referred to as system synergy. For example, if your system leans toward the brighter side of neutral and you want to tame it down to some degree or other, look for a warmer, more robust sounding amplifier, or even more obviously, swap over to less bright speakers. Remember that each component contributes to the overall sound, and with good synergy, sometimes the outcome can be seemingly greater than the sum of the parts in the chain. All right, so the last point I want to make, point number 8, is if your system doesn't inspire you, if it doesn't get you grooving, if it doesn't get your toe tapping, then you might want to rethink your approach to your system. Because don't forget, you got into higher end gear because of your love for music and because of your desire to reproduce it in the best way possible. So try not to lose sight of that and get yourself a system that strikes a chord with you. No pun intended. All right, guys, that's as far as I'm going to go for the moment. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in seeing more videos about audio gear in the future, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Once again, everyone, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.